Hello, BookTube. I once again want to apologize right off the bat for the thunderous noise that may be leaking into these videos. I'm going to apologize on all of today's videos. As soon as I opened my mouth to make a video today, a jackhammer started a foot from my front door, and that noise has only gotten worse over time, so it may bleed through. I'm hoping not. But anyway, apology out of the way. I had an errand to run this morning. First thing, I like to do my errands first thing so they don't disturb the bean, because Frida doesn't like early mornings. Whether I'm there or not, she doesn't like them. She's just in a gray funk until around noon. my pampered little princess. So I had an errand to run this morning. It was a very discreet errand. It involved a paycheck. And that's all it involved, was a paycheck. It had nothing to do with books whatsoever. So I have a large number of books to show you. And I thought we'd jump right into it. I found a bunch of books before I got safely back to my front door. The first one is a UK trade paperback. I love those, absolutely love them. And this is apparently a series of murder mysteries, historical murder mysteries. I'm a big fan of historical murder mysteries that I don't think I've ever heard of. So I don't think this person ever had an American publisher. The author is Michael Gregorio, and this book is A Visible Darkness. There's a man in a top hat looking at an age of sail sailing vessel, which is kind of interesting. And this is about a Prussian magistrate. So I'm thinking the 19th century. Let's see here. Hanno Stephanus, a magistrate from the gripping thrillers Critique of Criminal Reason and Days of Atonement. Those are two books in this series that I don't have. I've never heard of them. Is called to Prussia's Baltic coast, where the naked, mutilated body of a young woman has been found by the shore. This is an area rich in amber, harvested mainly by women, to be transformed into priceless jewelry, hence the picture on the cover. The occupying French army has taken over this lucrative trade to finance the invasion of Russia, but as more women are killed, they suspect the Prussian resistance movement. Hanno's fears, meanwhile, point towards a psychotic serial killer, and no woman is safe. So we've had this guy's adventures before. And his author biography tells me oh, I'm sorry, Michael Gregorio is a woman. Oh no, Michael Gregorio is the pen name of Michael Jacob and Daniela de Gregorio. So this is a writing team. Interesting. This is the third book in the Hanno Stephanus series. So I've never heard this. I always hope in a situation like this that the writers are doing their due diligence and that I'm not going to feel left out. We shall see. These I got a stack of books, as long as my arm, for I think $4 total. So I'm not out any money for this. All I'm going to be out is the reading time, and I'm going to add a great number of the things in this book haul to my weekend reading. A great number of these things will be on my Friday reads. Then this next one is a series. This is from, who did these things? Thunder's Mouth Press in New York. I loved this series of books. I don't have any of them anymore, and I love them. It's an anthology series with French flaps, and it's all they're all excerpts of nature writing and adventure real life accounts. This one is edited by Clint Willis, and it's called Epics on Everest. They all look like this. They all have you can see this is done for the 50th anniversary of the first ascent of Everest. And there are a whole bunch of these things. Here there's one for Rough Water, Stories of Survival from the Sea. I would love to have that. There's one called Wild, Stories of Survival from the World's Most Dangerous Places. High Seas, Stories from the Heroic Age of Sail. Lost on Mountains. Slender Thread, which is all about the Himalayas. There's one whole volume on Everest, as you see, but also Epic. I think that was the first one. Stories of Survival from the World's Highest Peaks. High, which is a sequel, also about adventure on the world's highest peaks. I read, I think, probably every one of these things. They all look relatively similar, and I love them all. I saw this one, and I was drawn to it right away. Everest is... I have been to the slopes of Everest on a number of different sides many times, and only at the end of my traveling did I realize what was happening to it, that it was becoming really, really commercialized. And since then, I have seen pictures in National Geographic of literal lines of people all tethered together with all their Gore-Tex, their bright, shiny Gore-Tex gear, and obviously no mountaineering expertise, just being led up the mountain. It's become just another item on the bucket list to do, and that it's doable. But these stories will, I bet, be from, I don't recall that I ever read this volume, but these stories will be from all across the spectrum. So there'll be plenty of stories here of deadly encounters with Everest up in the kill zone, up in the kill zone above 25,000 feet, when your body is dying. No matter what you do, no matter how much care you're taking of yourself, no matter how acclimated you were at base camp, your body up at that altitude is dying anyway. And it's just a question of whether or not the mountain will be gentle enough with you in terms of weather and surface texture, so that you can get to the top and back down before you die, before you throw an embolism and just die. It's totally unpredictable. Mountain climbers who have been acclimated and climbing for decades will sometimes have an embolism when they're up in the death zone, when they didn't in the 10 times before that. And people lose, at least in the old days, before those, GPS and helicopter evacuation or whatever, it was routine that you would lose digits to Everest from frostbite or whatever, or that you would permanently damage your eyesight. So I can't wait to read these. I love these books, and I don't think I've ever read this one, so can't wait to dig in and get those. And then this next one was almost like the serendipity gods of the Brattle were watching over me, even though I wasn't at the Brattle. Because just the other day, I was talking about my Camp NaNoWriMo writing project. I work in Lethals, which is the very first police procedural novel that I will ever have written. And that has caused me to do a lot of thinking about, this is my first police procedural, and it's my second murder mystery for NaNoWriMo. The second work of fiction in a row that is a murder mystery. The first one was historical. This one is not. And in both cases, for Camp NaNoWriMo in April and now in July, I set my word count, because you can do that in Camp NaNoWriMo. It's not 50,000. It doesn't have to be 50,000 words. And in both cases, I blew past my word count in no time at all, with only a fraction of the story written. And I remember thinking in April, I'm thinking now once again in July, and I think I said it on a video, that it just boggles my mind that anybody can write a murder mystery short story, and yet they are profuse. They are limitless in number, and always have been. So the genre was born in short stories. So there's got to be some sort of method there that I'm not cracking. And look what I found today, just doing an errand that had nothing to do with books. This is the Mysterious Press Anniversary Anthology, celebrating 25 years of the Mysterious Press. That's their logo there. And this is a collection of murder mystery short stories from some of their favorite authors, some of their favorite contributors. I have a handful of murder mystery anthologies. I'll gladly take another one. Absolutely. And we'll just see. I'll read these straight through. I won't pick and choose the authors that I know. I'll just read them straight through. And in this case, in addition to reading them to see how much I enjoy them, I'll also be reading them to see, take down a few notes. What are you doing that I'm not getting? How are you managing to bring this thing home satisfyingly in 25 pages? How are you managing to do that? I will be watching closely. Then we have a couple of little paperbacks that were, they were dirt cheap, so I grabbed them. The first one is well known. It's made the rounds here on BookTube, and I, of course, was reading it and championing it long before there was a BookTube, long before there was an internet, long before most of you were born. This is Mary Renault's novel, The Charioteer, with this new cover, which is, let's see here. After enduring an injury at Dunkirk during World War II, Laurie Odell, that's a man, is sent to a rural veterans hospital in England to convalesce. There he befriends a young, bright Andrew, a conscientious objector serving as an orderly. As they find solace and companionship together in the idyllic surroundings of the hospital, their friendship blooms into a discreet, chaste romance. Then one day, Ralph Lanyon, a mentor from Laurie's school days, suddenly reappears in Laurie's life and draws him into a tight-knit social circle of world-weary gay men, forcing him to choose between the sweet ideals of innocence and the distinct pleasures of experience. I read this a couple of times in mass market. I also had a hardcover from eons ago, so I think I probably read this 3 times, and all 3 times it was a disappointment to me. I love this author, of course, you must know that, but all 3 times it seemed like this was slangy, elliptical, that none of the emotional grounding that so sets this author's best books apart was happening in this book. But I realized when I saw it today that the last time I read it was a long time ago, so I will give it another try. I will try it again. And then this next one is something that Uh, what's the matter? Are we still recording? Yes, we are. This next one is something that I've heard about. I know the author well from the news, but I'd never read this book. I read his debut. This is Owen Jones, and this is The Establishment and How They Got Away with It. And this is the author of Chavs, and I read that. That was his debut. He's in his mid-30s now. He is certainly going to be Prime Minister of England one day, certainly. And he's a social critic. He writes for The Guardian. I believe he has a column for The Guardian. And Chavs was wonderful. Bitingly angry, but wonderful. He is a socialist and a sharp critic of modern society, many aspects of modern society, capitalism, social representation, everything. And this is, Chavs was his book, his look at the way the establishment views the bottom of the social register. And this is his book looking at the top of the social register. And I've read Chavs, but I've never read this. And here it is in a nice Penguin trade paperback from the UK. Oh, there he is. That's our author. And so I'm, that's great. It won't take more than an hour to read. Then we have a work of history. This is a fine hardcover of a work of history that I really like and an author that I really like. So when I saw the hardcover, I grabbed it. This is Black Earth, The Holocaust as History and Warning by Timothy Snyder, who also did Bloodlands. And this is an author who you really should read if you're interested in this subject. He's terrific. Terrific. Bitingly intelligent. And he takes this stuff, which is so well known, and makes it all read new and freshly horrifying. And Black Earth is amazing in that regard. So I got it because of the format, because of the trade paperback that I have has curling covers and a cracked spine. And I know that it's a volume of history that I want to keep, so I will gently retire the trade paperback and put the hardcover in its place. And then we have, to finish out, we have 3 works of biography. And the first one is a genuine find. This was an ordinary thrift shop that I went to with, clothes and baby toys and whatnot, and a relatively small selection of books. And yet I found something that I once had here at Hyde Cottage. And I got rid of it. I sent it away to one of you, and I thought poorly of that decision after the fact. I thought, you're never going to see that again. You could order it online, but you're never going to find it again. And I did. This is a book called Recollections of 3 Reigns by a man named Frederick Ponsonby. Has no dust jacket. It's just Recollections of 3 Reigns. You see, yeah, there we go. And this author was an equerry to Queen Victoria. Then he was an indispensable right-hand man to King Edward. And then for a while, for a few years, he was also an indispensable right-hand man and sort of father figure substitute for King George. So he had a behind-the-scenes look at the royal world for a long time. And the book is tremendously vigorous. It's just full of anecdotes that you can't do without. If you're writing a King Edward biography, you have to consult this book. There are things that are in here that are nowhere else. And you might encounter a Ponsonby anecdote. There were many critics when the book came out. The book was published posthumously, long posthumously, decades after Ponsonby died. And so by arrangement, presumably decades and decades after all of the people involved were dead. And a number of critics, when it initially appeared, were absolutely delighted by all of the dirt and anecdotes that are throughout the book, although they're presented just wonderfully, totally with a totally Jeevesian reserve, so that if they're personal bombshells, they don't feel it when you read it the first time. But if you're reading a biography, let's say you're researching Queen Victoria or King Edward, and you encounter a reference to an anecdote that's in this book, you're immediately going to be curious. You're going to have to find the book, because you're immediately going to be curious to know what other anecdotes are there that maybe the color of the first anecdote wasn't bright enough to see were valuable, or read between the lines, or whatever. And I used it for that. I've used it for that on a couple of different occasions, especially when dealing with Queen Mary. So I was glad to find it, to put it mildly. I was glad to find it. It felt so alone on this, this thrift shop shelf surrounded by waterlogged copies of Tom Clancy. It felt so alone. I felt like I was saving it. Then we have two other biographies to round things out, two more typical biographies. First one is it's a trade paperback, and it is definitely going to curl and crease, so it's just a placeholder really for the hardcover. I got rid of the hardcover. I sent it to somebody. I remember distinctly doing that and thinking I might regret it. I never saw it again. This is by Andrew Motion. It's his great biography of John Keats. No offense to the great Amy Lowell, but I love this biography. This is a trade paperback, and I'll reinforce it a bit, but I don't think this will be my permanent volume. I think I will need a hardcover or an electronic copy. Electronic copy. I'll come back to that when I'm done, because that was on my mind today as well. But this Motion's biography of Keats is incredible. Just incredible. It's amazing. It reads so exhaustively great on every page that you finish it thinking, okay, well, I don't really need to read another biography of this figure. Of course, I've read lots of other biographies of this figure. Find him fascinating. But this is, I think, by far, again, no offense to the Lowell family, but I think this is by far the best one. And then the last biography is something that I got from the publisher when it first came out, which was 2008. I got this from the publisher. The publisher was Farrar, Straus & Giroux, and I got rid of it for some reason. No idea why. This is Ingrid Rowland's book on Giordano Bruno. There's a perfect example of a great cover design as opposed to a black and white illustration of Bruno or whatever. But he was an Italian Dominican who was well ahead of his time, at least in terms of his bravery, and he wrote, in the 16th century, he wrote all sorts of tracts that were bound to come to the attention of the Inquisition. They were bound to. It wasn't just his astronomical stuff, although he wrote astronomical stuff that today you look back and read it, if you can find an English language translation of Bruno. You look back and read these things and it's incredible how he's talking about that the stars are distant suns and that they probably have planets circling around them just as Earth circles around our sun, and that some of those planets probably have life and maybe civilizations. And this was at a time when the heliocentric view of the universe was an outlying idea, and you could get in serious trouble for it. The idea that the Earth moves, you could get in serious trouble for proposing that, let alone that the Earth is not even the only world that might have people on it. But it wasn't that. Bruno also had lots of other opinions on lots of the fundamental tenets of Christianity, and eventually it brought him to the attention of the church. In 1600 he was burned to death in public. So the thing, as an old friend of mine said, the thing that you always want to remember about Bruno is that he died screaming. I think you want to remember a lot of other things about him too. I have read almost everything I get my hands on by this author, and he is underplayed in the sheer joy of his prose. I think a lot of it is not really readily translated into English. That's probably the reason. But he's a joy to read. It isn't just the firebrand nature of his ideas. He's, in most of his tracts, he is a joy to read. And he's also, some of you may know, he's the subject of a series of murder mysteries that are still coming out, where in every single one of those murder mysteries, they're wonderful. They're really, really good. But in every single one of them, an inquisitive reader is going to be thinking, well, okay, but you're chasing made-up characters, and there's a plot that has to unfurl here, and there are red herrings, and you know, this character, Bruno, he sounds so interesting that I'd kind of like to read about him and not deal with all the fault or all of a murder mystery. Well noted. And this book by Ingrid Rowland is a fine place to start. Fine place. This is a general, all-purpose, one-volume biography that tells you everything about him and everything that's significant. Just really good. No idea why I got rid of it. But a lot of these other books, I know exactly where my original copy went. That one, no idea. No idea where it went. But now it's back. It will go on the biography shelf. And the reason that I mention an electronic copy of the Andrew Motion Keats book is because since I put out the call a month ago, a great number of you have been very generous in sending me EPUB copies of ebooks, old and new. Lots of them. You've been very generous. I can't thank you enough. You've all been very generous doing that. They still are coming. And once I realized that there's a large number of ebooks that I was getting, I started to wonder, well, okay, is this going to dim your enjoyment or even your willingness to go hunting for used books, just miscellaneous used books on a day like today, for instance? The Brattle bookshop here in Boston is one thing, because that's a social thing as well as anything else. I know everybody there. I love visiting. It's steeped in memories for me, so that it would be worthwhile to go even if the pickings weren't so good. But random thrift shops, the minute I started getting all of these ebooks and reading them and enjoying them, I started wondering, okay, well, does this mean that the next time you go to a random thrift shop like I did today, and you look at something like the Andrew Motion biography of Keats, you're going to wonder, well, maybe there's an e-copy out there and you don't need to get this and fill a shelf with it. Or maybe, like for instance, this Michael Gregorio book, maybe all of them are available in ebooks and you don't need to worry about it. The pleasure, admittedly, the pleasure of a UK trade paperback. I don't know if that's true. I didn't detect any diminution today in the thrill of the hunt. But even today, I could sense that maybe it was going to feel a little pointless. Certainly, the more ebooks I get in EPUB format, feel free to send me files that you have. As long as it's EPUB, that file format is not causing me any problems. But even today, I could sense that, that, for instance, if I come across a book in a thrift shop that I have an EPUB version for, I'm not going to get it. I'm just going to be happy with the EPUB version. Almost always. Even today, I felt at just the first beginnings of that. I don't know. As more and more of my reading moves to electronic, I don't know what that will do for the random hunt of used bookstores. I'd like to think that I would still love to do it, at least at the Brattle, but we shall see. But in the meantime, that was let's do a Steve pile. That was my book hunting for today. Very successful for a day that wasn't supposed to have any book hunting at all. This was very successful. Lots of biography, some history, adventure stories, a murder mystery, and a murder mystery novel that I've not read, and then a bunch of murder mystery short stories that I'll be reading with an ulterior motive, and a couple of trade paperbacks. These orange trade paperbacks. That one I will reread, and one that I haven't read and very much want to read. So not a bad day for thrift shopping, especially when I wasn't planning on doing it. I left the house thinking, you will not do that. You will not come back with a bag load of books. You will not do that. It didn't turn out that way. I bet a lot of you know what that feels like. You're not judging me. So I'm going to wrap this up. That was an unexpected Friday book haul, and I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.